Hi everyone, welcome to the Nonfiction Book Report, the show where we talk about new, noteworthy nonfiction for your reading pleasure. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Michelle. We're librarians at Cook Memorial Public Library District.
Before we get into today's show, I want to talk about some of the library programming that's coming up. It's some amazing stuff. If you're interested, check out the Ins and Outs newsletter. You can also check out the library's event page for any of the upcoming things that we have coming at the library today.
Of course, you can always call the library or stop by the reference desk. We're happy to help you with any reference or reader's advisory or programming questions, and we can help you get signed up for an event.
Okay. So with all that out of the way, should we get into today's show?
Yes.
Our theme today is Indigenous stories. Yes. So, what have you got?
Right now, I have We Are the Middle of Forever by Dar Jamil and Stan Rushworth. This is a compilation of interviews that they did. Each essay is ordered in the way that it actually happened.
Okay.
So throughout the book, the stories build on each other. I really like books with short stories because you can just read them in the 15 minutes that you have before bed. This book brings up a lot of really important questions, I think, and I've been dying to read it, so I'm so glad that I finally got a chance to pick it up.
Yeah.
So the first essay is about strength, and it really grounds the reader in the ideas throughout this book in terms of prioritizing the earth as a way of life. And doing together as a society and as a team, which...
So it's a climate change book.
It is.
Okay.
The title is We Are the Middle of Forever, Indigenous Voices from Turtle Island on the Changing Earth.
I missed the Changing Earth part. Okay.
So it does kind of address climate change.
It's interesting you marry the Indigenous with the climate change.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they do talk about both the positive and the negative. So another essay with Greg Castro, he is an Indigenous archaeologist, talks about combating climate change with treaties while also discussing America's history with treaties and Indigenous people in the United States that has resulted...
Don't have a very good history.
No, it's not good at all. It's not pretty. 90% of Indigenous historical sites are now gone, despite treaties that were made to protect them. And then in another chapter,
It's almost like a treaty is a death sentence.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're good. In another essay, Raquel Ramirez talks with Rushworth, and he's Indigenous himself living in California, and they talk about all the ways that they were told that Native American people don't exist, and how do they honor themselves and where they come from, and their own identity when they're being told that their identity is gone.
We as kids were told in school that the natives don't exist anymore, their populations dwindled, at the start of the... when the Europeans came over, and it just kind of was a given.
We talk about Indigenous people like they're historical.
Yeah, it might be wishful thinking of the American government to erase them, but they're still here.
There's some truth in that sentence. So people also talk about wanting Indigenous wisdom, which is like kind of what this book is.
Okay.
But then, how do you want Indigenous wisdom, but then not deal with the history of Indigenous peoples in the United States who have been marginalized and have had their culture and their people washed away entirely in the United States. So they also talk about feeling this pain and educating yourselves with the history of Indigenous peoples, and then allowing yourself to grow and experience the cycle of life in nature, which is kind of a starting off point for the rest of the book, which talks about climate change. So Jamil is an Iraqi correspondent. He is not of Native American descent. His essays are very journalistic in nature, and his writing is just beautiful, as is Stan Rushworth's writing. He is of Native American descent, so when he is doing the interview, you get two perspectives of Native American perspectives.
Awesome.
Yeah. So the writing is luminous. Again, this is We Are the Middle of Forever, Indigenous Voices on Turtle Island for a Changing Earth.
And if you think about it, the Indigenous peoples have been stewards of this continent for far longer than we have. So
they have.
It'd be, I can't think of the word, but to think that we don't have anything to learn from them. So
Yeah.
can't think of the word. Anyway, it'll come to me at the end of it when we're done filming. Cool. So my turn?
Yes. Yes, your turn.
Awesome. All right, so let me tell you about Leah Myers. This is Thinning Blood, a memoir of family, faith, and identity by Leah Myers. And she is possibly, it's uncertain at this point, but she is possibly the last member of her tribe. She's a member of the Jamestown Sklallam tribe, and she talks about how she holds on to her tribal identification card like it's a second part of herself, just because it's a big part of her identity. So she talks about how, so Leah is a descendant of the Jamestown Sklallam tribe. Her great-great-grandmother was 100% Indigenous, and then she married a white man, and so then their children were half, and that was Leah's grandmother, was one of her children. She raised the kids kind of anti-culture, right? Sort of pushed away her own culture and raised them to be as white, right? I really connected with that because it is a lot from my story. And my grandparents were my grandma was born in Texas, but her grandma was born in Mexico. And my mom, she was raised speaking Spanish at home, but when her older sisters went to school, this administrators told my grandparents, if you want your children to be successful, then you need to speak English at home. So they went from speaking 100% Spanish at home to speaking 100% English at home, and my mom no longer has the language. She also doesn't have a lot of memories from when she was a young girl, and she thinks that they're locked behind language that she no longer has access to. But I really connected with Leah in that regard because there's a great desire for her to understand the language and a wish that she had it, that it had been part of her upbringing. And I have that as well. And I used to be angry at my mom for not teaching us Spanish. Like, you know Spanish, why didn't you teach us? And it only came when I was an adult that I understood the trauma that surrounded the language for her as a child and why she didn't have the language to give to me when she had me. And it was a desire similar to Leah's family to assimilate into the culture, where there was a belief that if you didn't have that language and you had English, that was going to be better for you. It remains to be seen. Anyway, Leah structures the book. She talks about her female relatives, and she, as she's discussing them, she sort of builds a theoretical or hypothetical totem pole. And we've all heard the phrase, the low man on the totem pole. What does that mean to you?
The bottom. Entry level,
Yeah. The expendable one, right? The low man on the totem pole.
Yeah.
Leah talks briefly about totem poles in the beginning, and she explains that phrasing, that colloquialism, the low man on the totem pole, is not a correct interpretation. That in their culture, the totem pole, the older generations are on the bottom, and the newer generations are on the top. And the lowest man on the totem pole is that base. There's a reverence to the strength, to where the generations have come from, to their origins, and there is a respect for the low man on the totem pole, not a disregard or a disdain for. So in Leah's totem pole, the low man, or the lowest totem on that pole, is her great-grandmother, and she is a bear. So she talks about first she talks about the legend of the bear, and then she talks about the ways that her great-grandmother embodied that energy and just how she sees the bear and her great-grandmother. And then she talks about her grandmother as the salmon, and then she talks about the legend of the salmon and the way that they are, procreate, and their life cycle and the span of the salmon, their journey through the ocean to the stream. and she connects that to her grandmother. And then her mom is the hummingbird, and so she talks about ways that her mom embodies hummingbird energy, and for herself, at the top of the totem pole, she places the raven as herself. And when she's describing the totem pole, she's describing it as if it's out in some forest in nature, and the bear on the bottom is weathered, and the only one that has color is the hummingbird, and the salmon, you can see is sort of you could see that it was once a rich salmon color, and it's faded now. The imagery that she writes about in this book is just so beautiful, and it really is a visit into a Native person as they're contemplating the end of their culture, the end of their existence. You know, the blood quantum laws that make her the last person of her tribe were actually the invention of the American government.
I didn't know that.
As a way to erase the Native population.
Oh my God.
So if you only had so much blood, then you couldn't be considered a Native. And she has relatives who fall below that guideline. So, you know, it was a Western invention, but the Native tribes have taken that and made it their own as a way to help preserve their culture as their culture is being wiped out around them. And I can understand why they did it, but it also then draws these lines, and there's members of her family who aren't technically considered part of the tribe. They don't have identification cards, they don't have Native cards, and so they don't get the benefits. So they don't have any health coverage, they don't get any of the benefits of being members of the tribe, and yet they're still marginalized, they're still dehumanized because they're part of the indigenous population for all intents and purposes, except when you look at the blood quantum laws. So it's a very fascinating read to sit with Leah as she meditates on, you know, technically the end of her people, how that feels, what that means for her, and what that could possibly. There's an exercise in here where she talks about 7 generations. So there's an exercise when you are maturing to think about your 7th generation ancestor, and she writes a letter to that person because she realizes that probably because of some of the decisions that she made, that person won't even exist. Because she talks about that she doesn't have a desire to have children, but also the decisions that her great-grandmother made that really kind of also put her here where she is now. You know, so it's fascinating read to think about, you know, a culture that's just disappearing right before our eyes. It's like trying to catch wind in your hand.
That I will check your book out. We can switch books.
All right, cool. Make sure you return it though.
Okay.
Well, that's all for today. So if people want to participate in the discussion, maybe they've read an Indigenous story that they want to share with us. Perhaps they have a lesson or a fact that they want to share with us. How can they do that?
Leave us a comment on this video, and leave us your stories, leave us your book recommendations, and we're going to look through that. So
yeah, and we'll be back next month for our next December's Nonfiction Book Report, where our theme is gifts, I think.
Yep, gifts.
So if you're looking for fiction recommendations, check out the Bookies YouTube videos here on the YouTube channel. There's tons of mystery, romance, suspense, science fiction recommendations for your reading pleasure there as well. And that's put together by our wonderful Popular Services team here at Cook Memorial.
Until next time, we'll see you at the reference desk.
I'll see you at the reference desk, guys. Bye.